Sirens echoed across the countryside. Protesters were thrown into vans. Farmers shouted as their tractors were blocked. And shockingly, even ordinary voters were handcuffed near polling booths. What just happened in the United Kingdom has left the whole country, and even the king, in absolute disbelief. Keir Starmer's government has launched what many are calling a full-scale political crackdown, arresting those who speak, vote, or stand in the way. This isn't a scene from a movie. It's real, it's recent, and it's turning Britain's democracy upside down. It began quietly, almost unnoticeably. A few small protests were forming outside government buildings in London, Birmingham, and Sheffield. At first, it seemed like just another day of demonstrations, some about food prices, others about farmland rights, and a few about voter ID laws. But by mid-morning, everything changed. Police units, many in riot gear, moved in swiftly. Reports came in that over 200 people had been arrested across 3 counties within just 1 hour. By the afternoon, that number had tripled. This sudden, sweeping action was not just against protest organizers. Videos show elderly voters being stopped outside polling stations. Farmers were dragged from their tractors. In one clip that went viral within minutes, a young mother holding a sign about children's food rights was handcuffed and taken away while her child cried in the background. People on social media began using the hashtag Starmer Crackdown. Within an hour, it was trending in the UK, then across the globe. So, what was the official reason? According to government spokespeople, the arrests were made to prevent the spread of disinformation and maintain national order. They said these groups were undermining public trust and threatening democratic stability. But critics argue this explanation doesn't match what the world just witnessed. These were not violent riots. There were no weapons. No one was looting or burning buildings. These were people with signs, megaphones, or simply casting votes. One local MP described the events as a terrifying abuse of power. Civil rights groups are calling this the most aggressive peacetime action against civilians in recent British history. Even some within Starmer's own party are reportedly shocked, with unnamed insiders leaking that several MPs were completely blindsided by the operation. Meanwhile, farmers' groups have said this isn't just about politics, it's about survival. Many were protesting because of new rules restricting land use and access to fuel subsidies. "We're not criminals. We're just trying to feed the country," one farmer shouted while being loaded into a van. In areas like Cornwall and Yorkshire, rural communities are reporting that entire villages have been blocked from traveling to local town halls. There are claims of voter suppression, though the government strongly denies this. Still, the images tell a different story. Lines of police surrounding quiet polling places, protesters chased down for carrying hand-painted banners, streets lined with silence instead of debate. Several journalists covering the events were also allegedly detained or forced to delete their footage. Press freedom organizations have already filed complaints, stating this could be a violation of the Human Rights Act. The Independent Police Complaints Commission has said it will launch a review, but no date has been confirmed. And all of this, every arrest, every siren, every moment of silence, happened within a span of just a few hours. Britain changed in a single morning, and while officials claim it's necessary security, many citizens believe it's a dangerous step toward authoritarian control. Now, all eyes are on Buckingham Palace, because behind the scenes, one man is said to be more furious than anyone else. The king was not silent. Inside Buckingham Palace, things turned tense quickly. While the Prime Minister's office defended the mass arrests as necessary to prevent unrest, reports from royal insiders painted a very different picture. King Charles was said to be deeply shaken and visibly angry upon receiving early briefings from senior advisors. One aide, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said the king's mood changed sharply after watching live footage of police detaining farmers, elderly citizens, and peaceful demonstrators. According to multiple palace sources, Charles demanded an emergency meeting with senior constitutional advisors and members of the Privy Council. Though the king traditionally remains politically neutral, his advisors confirmed that he has the right to be informed of major national actions, especially those that could shake public trust. And this time, he wasn't just watching. He was, reportedly asking hard questions. Why voters? Why farmers? What threat do they pose to the nation? The king allegedly asked one of his advisors during the early stages of the crackdown. His tone, according to one source, was stern and serious, not ceremonial. And when the footage of a mother being handcuffed while holding her child was brought to his attention, he reportedly walked out of the room without a word. By mid-afternoon, the Royal Communications Office was flooded with emails, letters, and calls from British citizens. Many begged the king to speak out. Others simply asked, "Are we still a democracy?" Still, there was no official statement from the palace, at least not yet. But that didn't mean silence behind the scenes. A senior former royal advisor, now retired, shared his concern on a live interview saying, "This is uncharted territory. The king does not get involved in government decisions, but when citizens are arrested in the hundreds during peacetime for simply voting or protesting, the crown has a duty to uphold the moral heartbeat of the nation." This situation has drawn comparisons to rare moments in British history, times when the monarchy felt pressure to act during a national crisis. Though symbolic in power, the monarch's voice can carry massive influence. The question now is, will King Charles use it? Some constitutional experts are urging caution. They remind the public that the king must avoid stepping into active political disputes. But others argue this is no longer about politics. It's about basic civil rights. To add fuel to the fire, leaks from a close royal contact claim that Charles personally called a senior cabinet member after watching unedited footage of the protests. The exact contents of that call are unknown, but one source described the king's words as not ceremonial, not polite, just furious. What would happen if the king were to make a public statement? Would it deepen the crisis or bring balance to the chaos? Some say even a brief message could signal a turning point, a calm voice in a storm, a reminder that the British people still matter and someone is listening. Right now, pressure is building, not just on Starmer's government, but on the monarchy itself. If Charles remains silent, critics will say he turned his back on his people. If he speaks, he risks opening a new chapter in royal intervention. So far, the palace remains officially quiet. But all signs suggest that silence may not last much longer. The king has seen what's happening. The world has seen what's happening. And Britain waits for the voice that could change everything. As the dust begins to settle, the question burning across Britain is simple. Why these people? Why were peaceful farmers, soft-spoken protesters, and even quiet voters outside polling stations suddenly treated like criminals? Who gave the order, and why was this group seen as a threat? Government spokespeople have claimed the crackdown was focused on extremist organizing and threats to national unity. But when we examine the groups targeted, things don't add up. First, let's look at the farmers. Across rural England and Wales, small-scale farmers have been gathering for months. Their frustration started with fuel restrictions, changes in agricultural subsidies, and new land use policies they claim benefit large corporations over family farms. Many were simply asking for fair treatment, marching with signs, attending local town hall meetings, or peacefully protesting in tractors. No violence, no weapons, just hardworking citizens demanding a voice. Yet, many were arrested, their equipment seized, and their lands surrounded by enforcement teams. In several counties, entire roads leading to farm co-ops were blocked off by police vehicles. Next came the protesters. These were not fringe radicals, but everyday people. Nurses protesting NHS budget cuts, teachers marching against classroom overcrowding, environmental groups calling for cleaner policies. And still, they were labeled as part of a growing threat to civil order. In London's Hyde Park, a woman holding a sign that simply read, "Listen to the people," was thrown into a police van. The footage of her arrest has now crossed 5 million views, and growing. Then there's the most shocking group of all, the voters. Reports have emerged from at least 7 districts that individuals were stopped outside polling stations, questioned, and in some cases, detained. One man in Manchester claims he was tackled by police after taking a photo of a long queue at a local election site. In Sussex, an elderly woman in a wheelchair was removed from the voting line after asking too many questions about the ballot. In Leeds, university students were detained for holding signs that said, "We demand truth." These aren't isolated incidents. They point to a pattern, one that suggests the government was not just targeting potential unrest, but attempting to silence any group that dared speak, march, or even raise a question. When asked about these arrests, one government advisor stated that protection of democratic order sometimes requires firm and fast action. But to many, this sounds more like fear than order. Suppression, not protection. Civil rights groups are outraged. One prominent UK-based legal alliance said this week's events show the beginnings of authoritarian drift. A representative from Liberty UK added, "When you arrest farmers, voters, and peaceful protesters, you're not preserving democracy, you're dismantling it." Even more disturbing, several of those arrested were allegedly taken without being told their specific charges. Some were held for hours without legal representation. A few families still don't know where their relatives were taken. This kind of secrecy has only added to public fear and suspicion. And it's not just local concern. International observers are now watching closely. Human rights watchdogs from the EU and UN have both called for immediate reviews of the Starmer government's conduct. Some European officials have even suggested suspending diplomatic visits until answers are given. In a democratic country, the right to protest, vote, and question government policy is supposed to be protected, not punished. But what the UK saw in these last 24 hours tells a different story. A story where peaceful farmers are labeled as threats, protesters are treated like rebels, and voters are treated like criminals. For now, the arrests continue. The silence from the top remains. But something is changing. People are starting to ask the questions those in power fear the most. And the louder those questions get, the more the system seems determined to shut them down. The streets may be quieter now, but the fire has only just begun to burn. Across the country, the public is erupting, not with violence, but with voices. Loud, raw, and full of disbelief. The outrage is everywhere. On social media, in schools, in churches, in late-night cafes. What happened over these past hours has shaken the very foundation of how Britons see their democracy. And the political fallout is exploding at every level. Within minutes of the arrests going viral, hashtags like Starmer Crackdown, Not My Prime Minister, and Dabar Free the Voters flooded platforms like X, TikTok, and Instagram. Influencers, journalists, even celebrities began speaking out. One actor from a major BBC drama posted, "When farmers get arrested and voters get dragged away, something is very, very wrong with this country." That single post hit over 10 million views within 24 hours. Students. At more than 30 universities staged sit-ins, hundreds of workers refused to clock in, joining what is being called the silent strike. Videos show commuters in London standing still at train stations in protest, refusing to board. Outside Parliament, families are placing candles and pictures of arrested loved ones on the pavement. Some of the images are heartbreaking. Elderly parents, young children crying, and partners clutching signs that say, "Let them come home." The opposition parties are also speaking louder now. The leader of one minority party stood outside Westminster and said, "We warned about power going unchecked. We warned about Starmer's silence growing into control. Today we see what happens when no one listens." He demanded an emergency session in Parliament to review the legality of the arrests. By midday, 5 other MPs had joined him, calling for a public inquiry and the immediate release of all nonviolent detainees. But it's not just Starmer under fire. Several cabinet ministers are being forced to answer difficult questions. The Home Secretary is accused of bypassing legal channels to approve the police operation. The Justice Secretary has so far refused to comment on reports that legal aid was denied to many of the arrested. Some insiders say multiple resignations are now very possible in the coming days. Meanwhile, lawyers from major human rights groups have already filed formal challenges, accusing the government of violating the UK's own Human Rights Act, particularly the right to protest, vote, and express dissent. One of the UK's top legal scholars wrote in a column that Starmer may have just opened a door Britain has never dared enter: democracy enforced by fear. Pressure is also mounting on the E's palace. With the king already deeply disturbed, the public is now demanding a response. More than 2 million people have signed a petition titled, "Speak Now, Your Majesty." The petition calls on King Charles to issue a national address and defend the civil rights of British citizens. Some argue the king must remain neutral, but others say this is not politics anymore. This is the soul of the nation at stake. Even outside the UK, world leaders are responding. Canada, Germany, and Ireland have expressed serious concern over the treatment of British civilians. The United States has called for clarity and transparency in how the arrests were carried out. The European Union has scheduled a review meeting to consider whether this crackdown violates basic democratic standards. Britain's global image, once proud, principled, and peaceful, is now under heavy scrutiny. And through it all, the people are still rising. More protests are being planned. More voices are rising in defiance. And perhaps, most significantly, more citizens who have never marched, never voted, and never spoken out are beginning to do so now. In moments like this, silence is no longer safe, neutrality is no longer noble, and power without limits becomes fear in action. Keir Starmer's government may have tried to control the country, but what they've done is awaken it. The question now is simple. Will this moment spark real change, or is it just the beginning of something even darker? 1. Thing is clear, the people are watching, the king is listening, and the world will remember what Britain does next.